This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting of G20. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor.
But the third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting, TIWG in short, as we call it, is underway in Kevadia, Gujarat. 75 international delegates from various G20 countries would be participating. Well, the focus is on adopting proposals put forward by Indian presidency in global trade and investment-related issues. Welcome to Akashvani Studio.
Thank you very much.
Can we say that the focus of a G20 meeting on trade entails building, number one, consensus, number two, adopting proposals, and number three, working on how to implement them, and all this in the interest of global trade? Having said this, does India have an edge being the host country?
You are very right. India does have an advantage being the host country. India is right now holding the presidency of this prestigious body G20. And as far as trade and investment are concerned, you would recall that this is the ongoing meeting is the third round. The first round happened in early 2023 in Mumbai. That was the financial capital of the country. And the second one was sometime in May in Bengaluru. And the broad direction of these discussions that we have seen in the first two meetings and what we will be seeing in the current ongoing meeting is broadly the same, which is how do you make sure that India's trade potential and global trade potential, they do come together to sustain the growth of both trade and investment in the global economy. Now, in this round, what I understand is there would be essentially focus on 5 key areas, which is how do you make sure trade can be used for enhancing growth. And the second would be how do you make sure that trade and global value chains can be integrated and can be used to contribute to higher growth in trade. And the third issue would be what role can the micro, mini and medium small enterprises can play in enhancing global trade. And the fourth issue would be that trade can be enhanced through better infrastructure. So therefore, what kind of role logistics should play and what can be done to improve logistics in our attempt to improve trade. And finally, what kind of further reforms can be introduced in the global multilateral trading system monitored by the World Trading Organization. So these are the 5 broad issues that I am expecting the third round of Trade and Investment Working Group meeting will discuss and try to thrash out, keeping in mind the India's overall spirit of this trade and investment meeting, which is summed up in these words of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is the world is my family. So trade should happen in a very integrated and a globally friction-free, restriction-free way, achieving higher growth and prosperity.
Correctly said, and you talked about the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is some philosophy which actually originated in India, so it's all the more pertinent that we talk about it. As our Prime Minister says, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. So some areas under discussion are digitization of trade documents, and that would be significant considering the fact that G20 is a platform of developing and developed nations, and this digitization would help them come on par with each other somewhat. Also, how do you view the role and integration of MSMEs in the world trade? Because as far as India is concerned, they contribute 48% to India's GDP. Could you enlighten us on these 2 points?
You mentioned 2 things. One is the digitalization of trade documents. Other is the role of the MSMEs.
Yes, sir.
Now, very important that you mention the digitization of trade documents, because over the years, what we have seen in global trade is that the terms of trade have moved away from just focus on tariffs, but to non-tariff issues. Now, non-tariff issues are now pertaining to, at times, environment standards, at times labor standards, and at times even documentation standards. Now, this point about digitization of trade documents is actually aimed at addressing that third category of non-tariff trade barriers, so that all the trading countries in the world can actually agree to adopt standardized set of trade documents which are using digital technology to make them seamless and talk to each other and connected with each other. So that's one part of this working group which we'll try to resolve. The other part, from India's point of view, is how do you integrate the MSMEs in global trade? Many developed, even some developing countries have worked very hard on developing the medium and small and micro enterprises. India is also working very hard to increase their role in trade and production. Now, as you mentioned, they account for around 48% of total trade. Now, it's a fact that if MSME is encouraged to play a bigger role through better integration with world trade by connecting with the global value chains across the world, then there are two specific advantages that you get. One is that MSMEs by nature employ more people, and therefore employment issues will get addressed to a great extent. And number two, when you encourage MSMEs to play a larger role, then the challenges of standardization, standards that are acceptable in global markets, they also get addressed. So therefore, both the issues will get a boost, and I think that will be a good goal to achieve.
So when a foreign country, just to divert slightly, when a foreign company wants to invest in our country, we tell them that, okay, this much percentage you must outsource from an MSME. The whole process of getting MSME into the global mainstream and use it as an opportunity to create employment, does it go like this? These are the norms somewhat
No, I think it is not a question of earmarking a quota for them. It is a question of bringing them on a platform, as a result of which they become a partner in global trade. Now, what is really happening is that globally, the trade are becoming increasingly dependent on global value chains, which essentially mean that a single product is not being manufactured by a single entity, but that single product is being produced in different stages by different enterprises located at times in different countries, and they are part of one global value chain. Now, India's MSME sector need to be upgraded to a level, and why India's and many other developing countries or even some developed countries who are members of G20 can actually help integration of MSMEs into this global value chain so that the benefits percolate down to a larger number of people, more number of workers, employees, and also to society in general. So therefore, MSMEs, it is not a question of earmarking a quota for them, but making sure that they can take part in these global value chain activities.
Bhattacharya, you mentioned about the role of World Trade Organization and that it needs probably some kind of reforms. We now see that the profile of trade has changed post-COVID and in the light of the fact that the Ukraine-Russia war is still on. In fact, there is some kind of a paradox in the world. On one hand, countries say, I, me, my country first. On the other hand, we all know that there is a kind of a symbiotic relationship amongst countries. One can't do without the other. And the impact of, like in the case of Ukraine-Russia war, there's a ripple effect on the economy. How would you like to comment on this?
You are right. What we have seen in the last few years, particularly in post-COVID situation, is that there is rapid movement away from multilateralism in trade and seeking recourse to bilateral trade relations. Now, bilateral trade relations actually allow relationship to grow depending on relative strength of the two partners. Now, it does not necessarily encourage growth and prosperity through trade for the whole world. Whereas in the multilateral trading system, there is uniformity, there is standard, and everybody can take part in the trade as long as the tariffs are not discriminatory. Now, what we have seen in the last few years is countries are moving away from multilateralism, and as a matter of fact, the World Trading Organization apparatus is now becoming less and less used because the dispute settlement body, for example, is not functional anymore. Now, unless the dispute settlement body can be reactivated with the help of US agreeing to to appoint the members of this body so that people recover their faith in the WTO and its dispute settlement body, and multilateralism can once again come back in fashion. So therefore, it is very important, and I think this working group meeting will be able to bring about necessary reforms in WTO so that the agenda for multilateralism that had stalled can come back once again. We see bigger push to trade.
From multilateralism, I would like to talk about multipolar world, sir. When WTO was set up, the trade profile was different. The global trade had a different perspective, was in a different light. We have seen a predominance of the United States over all these global organizations. We are now talking about the phrase de-dollarization, and we are also saying that we are now dealing with 18 countries in rupee. Probably it will be too early to say that rupee is threatening the dollar, but de-dollarization is something which we are hearing very often these days. Is there some kind of a threat to the predominance of America, an organization like WTO, and do you think that we are moving now onto a more multipolar world, even as far as global trade is concerned?
Well, de-dollarization is something that only time will tell how we move in that direction. What certainly is happening is that the world is becoming multipolar, and I think the Indian government and the Indian authorities are well prepared to face this kind of a world. And not surprisingly, that the Third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting is actually taking note of it in a slightly tangential way by committing itself to addressing the challenges that are being faced by the Global South. And the Global South is a committee of nations which are not part of G20. They are outside G20. They are many countries in Asia, many countries in Africa, many countries in Far East Asia. Now, these are the countries which need to be brought under the global policy attention so that they also take full advantage. They benefit from global economic growth through trade and investment. So I think the Third Trade and Investment Working Group will also look at what kind of challenges need to be resolved if the Global South issues also have to be handled and tackled to their benefit and to the world's benefit.
Yes, India is supposed to be a voice for the South. So how do you see the role of the Asian Development Bank shaping up in supporting India's G20's presidency, especially in key priorities like cities as engines of economic growth, clean energy transition, and shaping global health agenda?
The Asian Development Bank is one of the many multilateral development banks which are obviously agents that will be utilized for achieving the goals of the Third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting and the G20, whose presidency is right now being enjoyed by the Indian government. No doubt about it that these multilateral bodies like the ADB or even the World Bank will be very, very useful. They can play an important role in enhancing trade and investment. But the larger point of bringing in these multilateral bodies into this frame is to re-establish the importance and linkage between trade and investment. Now, we often don't realize that the trade is directly connected with investment, which is connected with infrastructure, which again is connected with overall growth. Now, this working group will probably start with trade, look at how trade can be linked with investment and how investment feed into higher trade, and that investment takes place in areas which also help enhance infrastructure and then create kind of a virtual circle of sorts so that overall growth and sustainability goals are also achieved. So both trade and investment, global value chains, MSMEs, infrastructure and logistics for trade, and of course international trading reforms, these are all issues that are directly linked to each other and all need to be on the same page, so to say, so that the overall of G20's development goals can be achieved.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, for talking to us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Third Trade and Investment Working Group meeting of G20. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Lalima Anita Dang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on Air. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on Air Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.